Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update. The afternoon update with Lynlee Foo.
Good Friday afternoon to you. It's Lynlee with you on the afternoon update. Now, here's a scene we're seeing more and more often. Cinemas with their lights off and shutters down. Filmgarde has officially bowed out of the business, and Cathay Cineplexes, a name many of us grew up with, is now struggling to keep its doors open. It's not just about fewer places to watch a movie. These closures are raising bigger questions. Why are cinemas no longer seen as essential? Are we pricing cultural spaces out of our city? And could this same trend affect theatres and other performance venues too? Today on Industry Insight, we're joined by someone who's seen both sides of this story, screenwriter and producer Justin Deimen, who also heads the Intercultural Theatre Institute, where the next generation of creatives is being trained. Justin, welcome. Great to have you with me here in the studio.
Hello. It's been, a few months since we last spoke?
Yes, that's right. Let's start with this big picture for cinemas, right? Justin, what do you make of this string of cinema closures, from Filmgarde's exit to now Cathay's possible collapse?
Well, I mean, there's big macro factors, but also there are factors that are very, crucial to what Singapore needs to address as well. I think the biggest issue that I think, you talk to anyone, I have friends who are the owners of the cinemas, the holding companies and all that, they all come back to the one thing, which is, it's two things really, but the main thing that, the suits are more concerned about is the rising rental cost and property cost. There's a reason why one of the last few standing, which is Shaw, is still around, because they actually own the buildings that they're in.
Yep.
Anybody else, they kind of have to face the downstream and the upstream issues as well. So I think, one of the biggest issues we are facing is rental costs, opportunity costs for the property owners, figuring out whether or not cinemas are a great investment or a great client to have. And then the second big thing is obviously the big change in audience consumption over the years. I think it's an easy thing to point to COVID, but that trend has been quite apparent for the last 10 years.
Let's talk more about that. How do you think they've changed? What sort of patterns are we seeing? And how has that really disrupted traditional business models for cinemas?
Well, it's not just about the cinemas. It's actually the entire film, TV industry has been impacted. What's happening in the cinemas is just a symptom of what's happened. Essentially, a big swing has happened in the sense of audiences being able to make their own choices. They don't have to wait for somebody to program something for them. They don't have to. There's a lot more autonomy in their choices. Instead of people curating projects for them or movies or TV shows for them, now they're able to seek it out as well. They are able to tell creators what they want.
Right.
So I think one of the key things is, the biggest obvious point of view is, the streaming platforms, YouTube, etc. We are all talking about attention economy now.
Yeah,
and essentially, films just don't hold that market share as much as anything else anymore. You're even talking about gaming as well.
So how do you think this is affecting the broader arts and film industry, from actors to producers and technicians, since you work with all of these people?
Yeah, I haven't written in a long time. I've been more of a financier these days.
Okay.
So I've worked with everybody from the crew all the way up to other producers and IP owners. Essentially, there's just less work available for everyone to get involved in. There's less money to go around. But that's on a traditional paradigm. When you talk about where the money is going to, it's going towards individual creators. It's going towards independent creators. Nothing through the studio systems, nothing through the distribution platforms that used to be around. So what's happened is you have a whole economy of B2B players that have found themselves redundant because audiences are being able to go straight to the creators. The creators are able to go straight to their own audiences, and even marketing firms, media agencies are all finding it hard to align themselves with this, brave new world.
So ideally, what do you think is the best model given the current circumstances in terms of how cinemas can thrive?
Well, I think it's about looking at space in a different way. I think one of the biggest problems is people look at what they have and they think, okay, I can either do it one way or the other. When what we are seeing is that, when we start looking at spaces, it can be hybrid spaces, it can be lifestyle spaces, it can be arts and culture spaces, and arts and culture is a lifestyle as well. So people tend to forget that, going to the movies and all that, there is a larger canvas at play. I think, typical real estate logic also kind of undermines and undervalues the social utility of spaces. And I think we need to be able to not just convince the audience, but even the legislators, the business owners as well, why it's important that we need to be able to create more multi-purpose and cross-functional, cross-commercial, cross-community space values to all our urban planning as well. I think it really comes down to how we look at spaces, not even so much how do we tweak the business model or pivot our business model.
Okay. Just before we went on air, you talked about how you're doing a bit of theatre these days. You also lead Intercultural Theatre Institute. Do you see similar pressures in that space?
100%. I do think that it's important to understand where creative voices and creative souls are able to express their art, express what they do, what they do for civil society. I feel like one of the biggest pressure points that has happened with creatives in the last few years that there's no more infrastructure around them. There's no more scaffolding to be able to take one from where they are to the next step and to scale them up. Essentially, one of the things I believe in is that for new creative professionals, whether you're in the arts or the culture, the heritage, or you're in the entertainment spaces, it's important to everybody to be able to understand and have the skill sets to be creative entrepreneurs of their own, because that's where the business is going. That's where the industries are going, where people are standing more alone. They are more voice-centric, like you have a personality, you are a personality, you are a creator, you are an artist. You have to be able to stand on your own brand. You're able to stand on the work that you do. You need to be able to distribute and disseminate what you do as well. Essentially, these used to be infrastructures that B2B economy that I was telling you about earlier used to stand. And now that they are all going away, it puts a lot of pressures for creatives to be their own producers and their own managers and their own branding specialists. And I think, creatives and artists who are much more cross-functional will have a bit more resiliency moving forward, I think, in the next 5 to 7 years.
Okay. Talking about physical structures now, we're also seeing malls being repurposed into cinema, spaces for things like gyms, tuition centers, even civic services. Has the value proposition of cinemas changed for landlords?
I would say so, because they're looking at it and saying, because, it's space intensive. I was in a cinema recently and I was just enjoying the space, looking around, and realized that they probably took about 4 to 5 stories just for one a screen. And I was thinking, putting a commercial hat on, how would that space be valued by a traditional real estate developer right now? They would probably be saying, I can have rented this out to about 50 different offices instead of one big cinema. So I think the opportunity cost is always on their minds, but I think that's where the value proposition for malls are as well, when they start looking at what exactly is their value proposition within a neighborhood, within a community. Cinemas are safe spaces for people to meet, hang out, but at the same time express themselves as well, especially for youths, which is, especially in a place like Singapore, finding space just for youth has always been a tricky commodity to quantify. So I do think that, malls and commercial spaces like this have a responsibility to start looking at the entire ecosystem design and seeing how they fit into the space as well, and understanding that there is a social utility. It's what they create is actually a civic infrastructure as well. And I think that thought of thinking is missing right now, from my opinion.
Yeah. And, cinemas do require a lot of space, but the yield per square foot may not be competitive anymore, I think. Now, do you know of any examples where adaptive reuse or partnerships have worked?
I mean, I don't want to speak for any one institution, but I've seen, over the years how it's in different countries, Singapore as well, that, you can't just be one thing anymore. That's the main thing I took from how they've repurposed their space.
Okay.
They've brought in wider creative communities, not just filmmakers, to hold their spaces as, almost like a salon for ideas and people to mingle and the different sectors to kind of coalesce together. I think having these kind of safe spaces, having this kind of civic infrastructure in place, it is a community-based effort that I feel like maybe it might be even something that, policymakers, governments as well, are able to look across stat boards and understand that, we can't put everything into boxes. This is not just an art space. This is not just an entertainment space. Even within that, our own government looks at art and entertainment differently. One is for commercial, one's for mass market, one is for its niche, it's for cultural purpose and all that. But actually, it's one big thing. It's one big creative economy that we are looking at. It's one big cultural sector that we are looking at, because films are culture, theatre is culture. The same creators across both as well. And I do think that we have a long way to go in being able to articulate that message to the general population that, you might watch a movie, but watching a theatre performance is a bit different. Actually, it's all the same thing. It's just not being put together in the right messaging points.
So you're saying more institutional support for hybrid programming and flexible venues.
And I think messaging and capacity building across creative industries to be able to understand how they can all work together as one big creative economy.
Okay. Now let's talk about talent. If cinema and theatre spaces shrink, what does this mean for the ecosystem, especially for young creatives entering the industry?
I'll give you an anecdote about my life, right? When I was 12 or 13, the first movie I actually paid for with my own money. And I was proud of doing it, and I will never forget it. And it's one of my favorite movies of all time still, is Ong Keng Seng's Army Days. So I remember my mom used to always bring me for movies, and it was like Disney movies, whatever. But the first one I ever paid for was Army Days. And I remember this was their old Cathay. And I can still remember my experience in it. I can still remember, how the popcorn smelled. I can still remember the auntie who laughed like crazy.
The kacang putih man.
And that as well. So I can remember all these things because it was so formative. And I do think that we are going to miss out a lot of that in our new generation of culture seekers, that they won't be able to have spaces where they are able to kind of, jointly be Singaporean, be Asian together. I think if I put on a more commercial hat, I would say that we are going to be missing out on key voices. We're going to be missing out on key local stories, because if we don't have our own spaces to be able to premiere these stories or to platform them, who else in the world is going to show a Singaporean movie? So I'll take away the notion of not having enough work for the crew and creatives in Singapore, but the actual voices, the actual stories. It's like, what if you cut down on publishing industry in Singapore? The books aren't going to suddenly come in a different way. They are, maybe people will make more content for YouTube, but you'll lose that shared memory, that I think, actually, not only that, it drives inspiration for the next generation of creators as well, which I think we are at that stage now where if we don't protect that, we'll be starving for it in a few years' time.
It is sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's such a wonderful experience. Just going to the movies used to be such a big thing. Let's go to the movies, as a family, with friends, with your, girlfriend or boyfriend. Yeah. But now it's like, no, it's not a thing anymore.
I only see uncles mostly who go because it's too warm outside. They just need the aircon.
Okay, but coming back to the creative talent pipeline, what are your thoughts on the sort of industry pathways for creative graduates?
I think a couple of things. I mentioned earlier that they need to take more control of their own destinies in terms of their IP, their voice, their branding, where they are supposed to go. So the creative entrepreneurship angle is important. But I also think the big change, as I mentioned, that, we have taken, the B2B layer is shrinking. I think when money and all that was flowing in the industry 10 plus years ago, everybody was very keen on having deep specialists in different fields. Now, because things are a bit flattened and, there's not as much hierarchy and layers as much, I think one of the key factors is new creatives, they really need to be much more cross-functional. They need to understand the whole equation of the industry they're going in. How do I create? How do I develop? How do I get it distributed? How do I get it to get it monetized? All these things you don't need to be experts in, but you need to understand how it works. It's like being in a kitchen. You know what a blender does. You know what a fridge does. You don't have to be, even though you can fry an egg well, you may not know how to use an oven, but at least you know what everything is there for. I think it's the same issue that we are facing. There's been too much specialization and not enough generalists.
Okay. And, it's all to do with us losing all these cultural spaces as well. So what needs to happen to preserve these spaces? Should this be led by the industry, policymakers, or landlords?
I mean, it's a good question. I would say everybody has a part to play. I think audience development is obviously a very, very big question mark that even policymakers, industry are struggling with. But I do think it's about understanding the policy behind things first, and then having more private-public partnerships to bring in new layers of money to be able to prop up our cultural sectors. Once that is done, so I'll give you a couple of weeks ago I was in Vancouver. I had a free day, I had nothing to do. And I was in downtown Vancouver and I realized there was a big comedian in town. Well, he's not that big anymore, but he's a known name. He was at the Orpheum Theatre, which is very famous in Vancouver. So I just walked down, tried to buy a ticket. It was completely full. There was like 10, I think it's more than 10,000 seats or something, but it was completely full. The entire city came out for them for a one-man show. And I couldn't get a ticket. And I spoke to a couple of the people waiting around. So how come you guys, this is like the middle of the week. What are you guys, don't you guys have like things to do? Why are you guys out? He said, this is what we do. When we are not working, this is how we connect with the city. This is how we connect with each other.
Very interesting.
And I think we've missed that in Singapore in such a big way. So as I said, it takes everything from industry to creators to public policy mavens as well, to try to underscore why we are not connecting enough as a city. Whether you're Singaporean or an expat or you're a tourist, why are we not, why is the synapses not firing when it comes to spending time with each other, spending time around each other, spending time, enjoying a show that's in front of us, whether or not it's screen or in person. So I think that's a big fundamental question that we haven't grappled with in our pursuit for growth, I think.
Justin, there's so much to talk about, but I'm afraid we will have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us on Industry Insight. Justin Deimen, Executive Director of the Intercultural Theatre Institute and veteran screenwriter-producer on the evolving role of cinemas and what the closure wave means for Singapore's creative industries. This has been Industry Insight on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.